Welcome back, Focus Learners. Today, we're diving right into a seriously fascinating explainer on a text called Call of Duty Free: The Paradox of Global Mobility. Now, I know what you're thinking. Mobility, that's just hotels, airports, maybe some global trade, right? Well, actually, scratch that. We're going to peel back the layers of your standard everyday vacation to reveal this incredibly complex web of movement, consumption, identity, and really, globalization itself.
So, here's the big question. Does travel actually broaden humanity, or does it just commercialize it? That's the deepest underlying tension of our source text today. It totally challenges our basic understanding of what a vacation even represents. Like, are we genuinely learning and connecting when we travel, or are we just, engaging in a highly globalized form of consumerism? Keep that tension in the back of your mind as we go through this.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap. We've got 6 major themes to hit today: the meaning of movement, the myth of exclusivity, authenticity versus performance, the psychology of travel, the engine of globalization, and finally, the ultimate mobility paradox.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the meaning of movement and what's really happening beneath the surface of tourism.
We usually think of travel purely in terms of geography, right? Just getting on a plane and going from point A to point B. But our sources reveal a massive shift. They note that travel no longer simply moves people across geography. It moves identities, cultures, money, status, narratives, and consumption patterns. Honestly, this completely reframes our entire understanding. When movement becomes mass culture, it ceases to be just about the destination. Every time we pack a suitcase, we are literally shifting human narratives and financial ecosystems around the globe. This brings us to our first fundamental clash. On one side, we have this beautiful ideal of exploration, the belief that tourism enriches cultures and broadens our minds. But then, on the other side, we have the reality of exploitation. This is the argument that mass tourism actually damages local communities. Think about it: driving up housing prices, displacing locals, and forcing cities like Venice or Barcelona into these overcrowded, hyper-curated, Instagrammable redesigns. So it raises a really critical debate we have to look at impartially. Does the modern tourism industry actually do more harm than good to the places it touches? Moving right along to Section 2, the myth of exclusivity. Here we're going to deconstruct the so-called golden age of travel. People absolutely love to nostalgically imagine those elegant passengers taking luxurious journeys back in the day. But let's take a hard look at who actually had that privilege. Back in the 18th century, travel was strictly for the elite. These aristocratic grand tours were basically educational rites of passage. Then the 19th century brought us railways and ocean liners, followed by airplanes in the 20th century. And now, in the 21st century, we're in the era of mass, low-cost tourism. What used to be a super rare status symbol has morphed into everyday hypermobility for millions.
Which brings us to this incredibly compelling clash: accessibility versus exclusivity. When people complain about modern travel, are we genuinely mourning the loss of travel's quality today, or are we just mourning the loss of its exclusivity? It's a heavy philosophical debate. Democratizing travel is without a doubt a huge triumph of modern accessibility. Yet critics argue that the normalization of low-cost hypermobility has totally sacrificed the dignity of the journey. We aren't taking sides here, but man, it is a vital tension to recognize.
All right, let's pivot to Section 3, authenticity versus performance. Is real culture even surviving? Now, what's really interesting about this is that tourism doesn't just observe locations, it actively changes them. Often, it forces destinations to perform a sanitized, polished version of their own culture just for the tourists. And that brings us to a fascinating sociological term: psychological consumption. Our sources define this as the act of traveling not merely for geographical landmarks, but to consume immersion, identity, stories, and self-transformation. Think about that for a second. Modern travelers don't just want museums anymore. They want to consume an experience that changes who they are. You can literally see this playing out in modern travel trends: ecotourism, voluntourism, heritage tourism, wellness retreats, and monastic retreats. Every single one of these caters to that intense desire for psychological consumption. But, it begs a rather tricky question. When we book a voluntourism trip or fly halfway across the world to become digital nomads in Bali, are we genuinely seeking a messy, real-world understanding of a place, or are we just buying authenticity as a neatly packaged souvenir? It definitely leaves us torn. On one hand, we genuinely want cultural exchange, true authenticity. But on the other hand, there is this massive modern pressure to perform. I mean, let's be real, we all kind of want to take the exact same authentic sunset photo for our feeds, right? The source text really emphasizes how heavily social media complicates modern travel. We have to impartially weigh whether authentic travel is actually a genuine pursuit anymore, or if the intense pressure to document our lives has turned bucket list travel into nothing more than a performative personal branding exercise.
This inward look leads us perfectly into Section 4, the psychology of travel and why we behave badly away from home.
I want you to reflect on your own experiences for just a second. Why is it that perfectly normal people just throw social norms out the window or, abandon literally all diet and budget rules at the airport the minute they become tourists? Well, our sources brilliantly illustrate a specific behavioral progression for this. Step 1 is anonymity. You're a stranger in a strange land. That naturally leads to Step 2, emotional detachment from the local community. Which brings us to Step 3, a temporary freedom from consequences. Since you don't live there, the social pressures that keep you in check back home just completely vanish. And ultimately, this results in Step 4, the collapse of social norms. We simply behave differently outside our familiar social systems.
And this creates a deeply fascinating psychological clash between freedom and responsibility. Does escaping our familiar social systems free us up to discover our true identities? Or does that very same anonymity just encourage irresponsible behavior, causing us to ignore our moral obligations to the places we're visiting? Are we freed to be ourselves, or just free to be, irresponsible?
Okay, let's zoom way out to the macro level for Section 5, the engine of globalization, focusing on the invisible infrastructure of movement. We've talked a lot about people so far, but the crucial point is that none of this happens without the massive global trade systems making physical mobility possible in the first place. Human movement relies entirely on the movement of goods. Just look at these invisible infrastructures: shipping networks, trade hubs, way stations, free trade zones, and supply chains. Places like Hong Kong, Istanbul, and Chicago, they didn't become powerful by accident. They gained immense power precisely because they connected this movement. They are literally the hidden foundation of modern civilization.
But, as with everything we've explored today, this infrastructure comes with a profound tension. We have this relentless drive for efficiency through global economic integration, and it's competing directly with humanity, things like local resilience and culture. The text asks us to impartially weigh this massive debate. Does humanity's dependence on highly efficient global supply chains and free trade zones actually create more prosperity globally, or does it come at the direct expense of local resilience inequality, ultimately dehumanizing the global economy?
We have covered some incredible ground today, which brings us to our final synthesis in Section 6, the ultimate mobility paradox, where we'll summarize the deepest core conflicts.
Let's bring all these philosophical and sociological tensions together into some really concrete debate motions. The sources frame these using the World Scholars Cup structure, and it is a fantastic way to organize these ideas. Under ethics, we have heavy motions like whether mass tourism destroys authenticity and debates over our moral obligations to visited places. Over in identity, we're tackling whether social media makes travel less meaningful and if experiences have become commodified. And finally, under economics, we see the clash of whether free trade zones create inequality or if efficiency is prioritized over resilience. These are absolute world-class, best speaker-level debate topics that perfectly capture the depths of everything we've unpacked in this explainer.
Ultimately, every single one of those debates rolls up into this one overarching paradox. Globalization, the deep desire to connect the world and make movement accessible to everyone, versus preservation, the desperate need to protect local identities and environments. Does global movement inevitably destroy the very local, authentic identities it so desperately seeks to visit? I want to leave you with this final, really provocative thought from the source text. When everything becomes mobile, what happens to authenticity, belonging, and meaning? It's a heavy question for sure, and it's one that kind of forces us to look in the mirror the next time we pack our bags. Think about your own role in the hidden dynamics of modern travel. Thank you so much for joining me for this Explainer Focused Learners. Stay curious and keep questioning the world around you.